The Boston Bruins have signed a couple of key forwards to some longer-term deals, but the big question I want to discuss today is, did they leave enough room to sign defenseman Torey Krug, or will they end up trading him? We'll discuss all that coming up next. So welcome back here to Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have some news from around the NHL. The Boston Bruins have made some signings, but I want to discuss not only those contracts, but how it impacts their overall salary cap situation and whether or not Torey Krug will still fit into the mix longer term, as he's by far their biggest pending unrestricted free agent. So first of all, let's take a quick look at what they've done so far. The Boston Bruins have signed Charlie Coyle to a 6-year contract extension at $5.25 million. There is a modified no-trade clause all the way through this contract. It does vary from year to year. At some points, it has a 10-team no-trade. Later into the contract, it drops to 8, and the last year, I believe, it drops down to 3. But either way, there is a form of a modified no-trade through the duration of the contract. Now, Charlie Coyle, of course, was acquired by the Bruins last year near the trade deadline. Seemed to be a pretty solid fit. He was on a bit of a decline with the Minnesota Wild. They were looking to shake things up, and really, he's from the Boston area, so it was kind of a homecoming for him. So clearly, Charlie Coyle was really, I think, in my opinion, turned out to be a pretty solid acquisition by the Bruins. For the most part, he plays a lot of third-line center, but he can also play in the top 6 as a winger or number 2 center when needed. Of course, with Bergeron and Krejci both battling various injuries, it seems like all the time. There's quite often one of them is injured or battling something. He has that ability to be able to step up and really elevate his play and play the higher role. And he's very versatile that way. So I do think this is a pretty fair deal for Coyle and the Bruins. I mean, 6-year deal. He's only 27. It takes him till he's going to be about age 33. So overall, I like the signing for Charlie Coyle and the Bruins. It makes a lot of sense to keep him around. Like I said, he's been an excellent fit in my opinion. Hopefully his production can pick up a little bit, though. I know from an offensive standpoint, to make $5.25 million probably would be nice to see him get a few more points, but there's a lot of things he does really well in my opinion that don't necessarily show on the stat sheet. So overall, I do like the signing. I think it's a pretty fair contract. In the case of Chris Wagner, he gets a 3-year deal at $1.35 million, so he gets an extra 3 years with just a very slight raise. He's making $1.25 million right now. Of course, Chris Wagner's not afraid to play that physical role. He really does fit well with what you think of as a Boston Bruin. He's been a pretty solid fit there for the past couple of years, so certainly interesting to see them keep him around. It was a player that I wasn't real sure about on an expiring contract. I knew there probably was some desire to keep him around, but whether or not they could make the numbers work with all the other things they had to take care of was certainly something I wasn't sure of. But either way, these two forwards are going to be sticking around for an extended period of time. So pretty good contract signed by Don Sweeney and the Boston Bruins. But the bigger question today is how this is going to impact their overall cap situation and how it impacts Torey Krug's possibility of returning to the Bruins beyond the current season. They actually have quite a few other expiring contracts on the roster, whether it be unrestricted or restricted free agents. So I do want to have a quick look here at what they have on the go in that regard, discuss what they have already committed to their cap situation for next year and beyond, and what's the real possibilities here of Krug sticking around. Now, as you can see on the screen, they have about 4 other pending unrestricted free agents besides the ones that were signed here today. Of course, Torey Krug's the most prominent, currently making $5.25 million. I do believe it's fair to say he's going to be asking for a raise. Torey Krug's having a pretty solid year, 18 points in 20 games, certainly drives a big part of their offense, solid on the power play, and really, like I said, he's a big part of that Bruins blue line. Now, of course, they also have captain and longtime player Zdeno Chara on a $2 million deal, just signed a 1-year contract. So I would think the way Chara's playing and the way he looks, it wouldn't surprise me to see him want to do another 1-year deal. I think he's looking like he can continue to play. He's really kept himself in phenomenal shape. So barring something else changing, I wouldn't be surprised to see him return. They also have Nordstrom as well, a relatively versatile forward making $1 million per year, and backup goaltender Jaro Halak, who plays a very important role, making $2.75. I mean, I do think there's probably going to be some interest in all those players likely returning. Doesn't mean they're all going to, though, because obviously it boils down to money and whether or not they can fit them into their cap situation. Now, they also have some pretty prominent restricted free agents, and some of them are going to be getting pretty significant raises. Most prominently, forward Jake DeBrusk, who's had a pretty solid career so far. He's entering the final year of his entry-level contract, so he will be need to sign to a new deal next year. I would think that we'll probably see him do something that's considered relatively team-friendly on a bridge contract that we've seen with a lot of the other Bruins players do. So we'll see how that goes. But they also have Anders Bjork, Brendan Gaunce, Brett Ritchie, Carson Coleman, and defenseman Matt Grzelcyk. Now, there's been some talk that could Matt Grzelcyk basically replace Torey Krug, take on a bigger role, and kind of do a lot of the same things with similar production. And there is some people within the hockey world that kind of believe that they could go down that path if Krug does not return. But if you take a look at all those UFAs and all those RFAs, that's 10 players that don't have a contract for next year, and they already have over $65 million committed to the remaining parts of their roster that are signed for next year with 15 players under contract. So that certainly eats up a big chunk of the salary cap. We're only expecting to have minimal increases this year. It's probably in 2 years' time that we see a more significant increase once that new US TV deal kicks in, and then Seattle expansion as well. So I guess we will see how things go, but it's not going to leave a ton of money to sign, at least 8 out of these 10 players, with Torey Krug taking the biggest chunk of the puzzle here. Plus, you've also got backup goalie Jaro Halak, and as much as Tuukka Rask is, the more important of the two, Halak's played a pretty substantial role for the Bruins as well, and has been able to play more than a lot of backup goaltenders to really relieve Rask. If Rask got hurt at all, they didn't miss a beat. Halak's played extremely well during his time in Boston, and certainly, I'm not sure what he's going to want for a contract, but if they lose him, that's going to be another big blow to their team as well. I mean, he is getting up there in years, but for him to be productive for a couple more years beyond the current season would really not be all that far-fetched. So this begs the question is, could they end up trading Torey Krug? And to be honest, I don't really think that's going to happen. The Boston Bruins are having a pretty solid year so far. They've been dominating the Atlantic Division. They're one of the top teams in the NHL. Of course, last year they went to the Stanley Cup Finals. And the way things are going, I think they would have a shot to make it back there. I mean, until the playoffs start, until they get playing into that playoff round, it's really difficult to say with any kind of certainty. As they say in the playoffs, once you get in, anything can happen. And we've seen in recent years that that really is true. So there's no guarantee, of course, but considering how strong they've been and how they've looked so far, I really can't say that it would be that surprising. I really don't think it'd be all that surprising to see them, be another contender and make a run back to the finals and maybe even have a shot at winning it again this year. So certainly not something that would be surprising. Would the Bruins want to trade one of their best offensive weapons from the blue line when they're in the middle of a playoff run? Unlikely. So I think it's likely that he, at the very least, becomes their own rental this year. I can't imagine, unless the Bruins found a way to really improve the team through another type of blockbuster trade, it's hard to imagine. Now, of course, one contract that would be nice for the Bruins to get off the books and would certainly take the pressure off and might allow them a better shot at keeping Torey Krug would be if they could rid themselves of the David Backes contract. He does have a $6 million cap hit, and he is under contract for one more year after the current season. Now, the Bruins could consider a buyout, so that is a possibility to try to save some cap space that way, or they could try to find other ways to do this. But with all the contracts that they need to do, it's really difficult to say. I'm not sure that there's a high likelihood that Torey Krug returns, as much as there likely would be interest on both sides to do so. So let me know what you think down in the comments. What kind of contract would Torey Krug actually end up demanding next year? What would be a fair deal for him? Can the Bruins retain him? Or if they did trade him, what do you think would be some potential mock scenarios of what we could see with a Boston Bruins trade of Torey Krug? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section and we can discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.